Well, hello everybody, and once again, welcome back to our journey down the road to somewhere. And if you're joining us for the first time this week, we're happy to have you. We're actually in season 4 of our journey, and we're in episode 9 of going across the state of Oklahoma. And today's going to be a little bit different because we're actually going to look at 2 books in the Old Testament that are part of the minor prophets. Just wanted to give you a heads up that I'm going to be out of town the next 2 weeks. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 2-week break after today. Then I'll be back and we will go through and finish up the last of the minor prophets and all of the stops in the state of Oklahoma when I get back. So you have a little bit of time to get caught up if you're behind. And if you're just joining us, know that the entire series is available online on YouTube. So again, using my book, The Road to Somewhere, we are traveling with John Calvin and Joy Jardine down Route 66. They've been hired to film this series of little videos, so that's part of the narrative line in the book, the actual story of the fiction. And as they stop at each place along Route 66, every stop is connected to a video that gives an overview of the whole book that's attached to that particular place. A quick little overview of Route 66 in the book, in the video that they're shooting, and a quick overview of one of the 66 books of the Bible. Again, we are in Oklahoma, and the part of the Bible that corresponds in our journey to the state of Oklahoma are the prophets. And we happen to now be in the part of the prophets that are referred to as the minor prophets. And again, we're going to be looking at 2 of those minor prophets today. And a little spoiler, by the way, these are 2 of the prophets that whose message is not addressed to either Israel or Judah. And when we look at the 2 books we're going to look at, we'll see what their prophecies or who their prophecies were targeting. So in the book, Joy and John are making the drive down from Stroud, Oklahoma, and we are now kind of into the center of the state. And the city that's the next stop on the journey is actually Oklahoma City, which is actually the largest city in the state. It has a population of almost 700,000, and it's just about halfway through the state of Oklahoma. And one of the things that happens in the book, and we haven't spent as much time talking about the story, but when we get to Oklahoma City, actually when we are on our way to Oklahoma City from Stroud, there's about an hour drive there. And in the book, there's a big conversation that takes place between Joy and John on the issue of faith. And I really kind of wrestled with how much of that dialogue to go into with you, because we're trying to keep these little videos short. But if you have the book, I really want to encourage you to go back and to read chapter 32. And for those of you that don't have the book, what happens there is a discussion starts out about faith and really starts out about prayer. And again, this all is contained in chapter 32. The title of that chapter is Oklahoma City, Jonah, and Obadiah. But they get into a discussion about faith and doubt. And in that chapter, what I've done in the dialogue is really articulate what I think is a very important concept that has to do with faith and doubt. And I started thinking about this a number of years ago, and particularly the issue of doubt and why do people doubt? And it led me to also think about why do people believe. And so in their discussion, they're going to talk about what I call reasonable faith, which is a faith that is based upon really looking at the facts, doing research, asking tough questions, and then coming to some kind of a decision of believing. And there's reason involved. Unreasonable faith, and there's nothing wrong with unreasonable faith, but unreasonable faith is a faith that usually is sort of a leap of faith based upon either someone telling you about Christ, or maybe you hear a message in church or go to an event, and simply based upon hearing about Christ, you make a decision and invite Christ into your life. But you haven't really wrestled through facts and issues and things that keep people from not believing, and so there's not a lot of reason involved. I believe that if you really grow spiritually, there comes a point in time where you need to go back and you need to do some of that work, what's usually referred to as apologetics, and understanding that there are reasons to believe. And in the book, John then goes on to talk about how he believes that same process occurs when it comes to doubt, and that there is reasonable doubt. Some people will look at all the evidence and will take the time to process and think it through. Will actually read the Bible to see what the Bible actually says. And yet, looking at all of the evidence, they come to a position of not believing. But it's a reasonable doubt. I think that's true of, there's very few people I think that's true of, to be honest with you. I think most people have what I would call unreasonable doubt. They've just heard someone say, oh, you can't believe the Bible. It's just a book written by men, and, I don't believe. And when you ask them why they don't believe, they don't really have a reasonable answer for why. They have sort of taken a leap of doubt. And it's, I think, very important to understand those concepts. So I would really encourage you that have the book to go back and read it. I wish you all had it, because that chapter is a very important chapter. They actually end their conversation by talking about C.S. Lewis, the great professor at both Oxford and Cambridge. And C.S. Lewis is a classic example of what I would call a reasonable faith. He was an unbeliever. He was an atheist. He really kind of grew up that way, and then World War I, his best friend was killed, and so he just didn't believe. And when he began teaching at Oxford, he was surrounded by a group of people, including J.R.R. Tolkien and some other very well-known authors, and they all happened to be Christians. And so they began to engage him in a dialogue about faith, and it took a while, but ultimately, after examining and exploring and thinking it through, Lewis came to the conclusion it was true. And he actually is famous for making the statement that the night that he actually came to believe in God, he was the most reluctant convert in all of England. So all of that's in that chapter. And so I wish you could all read it in the book. It's one of my favorite interactions in the book. Then they get to Oklahoma City. Again, largest city in the state. Most of Route 66 in Oklahoma has been paved over, but there are still a lot of Route 66 attractions, and Joy decides that she wants to shoot the video at once was a little bitty dairy, then it became a grocery store, I think then it became a restaurant, but what is unique about it is that it has what is supposedly the world's largest milk bottle on top of it. And so Joy decides that would be a good place for them to shoot their video and to try and set up the shot in a way that people could see that giant milk bottle. In the video, John begins by, making a few quick comments on Oklahoma City, and he segues then into these two Old Testament prophets, the first of which is the prophet Obadiah. And in the book, as he's doing the video, John actually asks his audience, how many of you have ever read the book of Obadiah? I think if you were to ask most people, are you familiar or have you ever read the book of Obadiah, unless it's someone that has done one of those read through the Bible in a year kinds of programs, many people don't even know there is a book called Obadiah in the Bible. I think it might be in the Old Testament, probably maybe the least known of all of the books. It's funny because the other book we're going to look at, I think at least the storyline of it might be one of the best known. But Obadiah is a very short book. It's only 21 verses. And by the way, I have to say that I've made a mistake. I think originally I said that the prophets were arranged in a way from the largest in terms of the most content to the smallest. That was only true of the major prophets, actually. The arrangement of the minor prophets, really, most scholars don't know why they are arranged the way they are. And of course, Obadiah is kind of right in the middle, and it's the shortest of all of them. So I take back that little fact that it goes from longest to shortest. They really just aren't quite sure how this arrangement came about. But Obadiah is not a message to Israel or to Judah. Obadiah is actually a message to the people or the kingdom of Edom. And Edom is really a nation there to the south of Judah. And Edom seemed to be a perennial problem to the Israelites, all the way back to the time of the Exodus and all the way up through the destruction of Jerusalem. The Edomites should have been brothers in a sense, because if you go back and kind of look at where they come from, they're actually the descendants of Esau, who was the brother of Jacob. So they're all kind of cousins, and yet they became extremely problematic. And one of the things, we think that Obadiah was probably written a little bit after 586, about the time of Lamentations when it was written, because part of what you see when you read the little book of Obadiah, and actually in Psalm 137, there's also a text that says that they were cheering on the destruction of Jerusalem. And I think it's the psalm that says that they were saying, tear it down, tear it down. And during the actual destruction of Jerusalem, we are told the words that were used is that they gloated over the destruction and that they took part in looting the city of Jerusalem. And so really what Obadiah is it's a message about Edom's coming destruction. And on the longer video, I go into some detail on the timing of how Edom was then conquered by the Babylonians after Judea. It was destroyed. A number of things happened to where literally nobody knows of any Edomites that actually exist in the world today. And so the message that God was going to basically wipe them off the face of the earth actually came to happen. And the message of the book is kind of, as you have done, it will be done to you. So short little book, Obadiah, and again, targeted at the nation of Edom rather than at Israel or Jerusalem. The second minor prophet that John goes on to talk about in this chapter, well, here's a little bit on Obadiah. The vision of Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. See, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. think there's actually a text a little bit later that says you'll be utterly destroyed, or you'll vanish from the face of the earth. So John goes on and he talks about another one in this particular chapter of the minor prophets. This is perhaps one of the more known of the minor prophets, and that is the book of Jonah. I will say this: most people that know something about the story of Jonah, if you were to ask them, would probably say, oh yeah, he's the guy that got swallowed by the whale. Now, that is part of the story of Jonah, but I think that most people that know that little piece of the story probably have never read Jonah, and probably don't actually know the main message of the book. It's a little bit of a debated book from the perspective that there are some scholars that think it's not a historical action, but that it was actually written more as a story, almost like a parable, a story that was set up to teach a specific truth, and there's a little satirical edge to the story. And many of you know it, but again, it's targeted at the nation. It's actually targeted specifically at the city of Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Some scholars think it was the earliest of the minor prophets, so that it would have been written long before the Assyrian Empire destroyed the northern kingdom. Others believe that perhaps it's a little just written shortly before. There's actually no historical record of the Assyrian Empire or Nineveh ever going through any kind of a repentance and coming to faith in the God of Israel. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It could be historical. It's just that debate goes on. Briefly, and many of you, maybe all of you, know the story, but you know the first part. Jonah is called by God to go to Nineveh and deliver a message. And in the book of Jonah, what we're told is that not only does he not head towards Nineveh, but that he turns around and he heads in the opposite direction, catches a boat in Joppa, and heads toward Tarshish. We aren't exactly sure where Tarshish was located, but many people think it was on the extreme western side of the Mediterranean, and most people at this point in time didn't travel very much further west out of the Mediterranean. It was almost like the end of the world for them, and so you can kind of think about, he's sent to Nineveh and he turns and he heads for the end of the world. Well, his journey doesn't go very far until the ship that he's on is in a severe storm, and it is discovered that the reason for the storm is that God is upset with Jonah, and Jonah basically says, throw me overboard and the storm will quit. Again, the longer video goes into more detail on this, so again, I really want to encourage you to watch that. But Jonah, we're told that the Lord prepares, and literally what the text says is that the Lord prepares a huge fish. It doesn't say a whale. So the concept of a whale doesn't come till much later, and actually the only place where it legitimately could be translated as whale is in the New Testament, which again is in the Greek language versus the Hebrew, and the word that appears there can mean whale, or it can mean a great or a huge fish. So, I jokingly called this episode A Fish Catches a Man. Normally we talk about a man catching a fish, but in this case, fish catches a man and Jonah gets swallowed. And he is inside that whale 3 days and 3 nights. Later, Jesus will actually make a reference to that in Matthew chapter 12 about him being buried and in the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. But inside of the huge fish, Jonah repents. And he basically tells God that I will do what you tell me to do. Now that's about as far as most people know, or they also know that then the fish spits Jonah up. Literally it says vomits him. I don't know if I have that text or not. Let's see. No, I don't. It literally says that the fish vomited him on the shore. And of course then Jonah goes to Nineveh. And he makes his way walking through Nineveh, which was a huge city at the time. The circumference of the city was something like 60 miles around. So Nineveh, it was a massive city. He goes through Nineveh, I think it's for 3 days, and basically telling them that in 40 days Nineveh is going to be destroyed. And unlike most of the prophets, Nineveh actually repents in the story. And when he repents, God relents and says he's not going to destroy them. And Jonah reacts by basically saying, I want to die. And here's where the real message of the story comes out. The reason that Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh, we find out, first of all, is because he hates the Assyrians, as most Jews would have. And not only does he hate the Assyrians, but he knows that if he goes and gives this message, there's a good chance that they will repent. And if they do repent, God won't judge them. So exactly what he was afraid might happen, happens. And the result of it is that he's really angry. He's upset about it. He wanted God to destroy these people. And so he leaves the city and he goes and he kind of sits in the desert. And then we're told that God prepares a plant for him to kind of give him shade. And then God, after preparing the plant, sends a worm to eat at the plant, and the plant dies. And Jonah again says, I want to die. 3 different times he says, I wish I could just die. And he's totally depressed. And then comes what I think is the big message of the book. Because what God then says to him is that, you're more concerned that a plant dies than that 120,000 people repent and are saved. He refers to them as a people that don't know their left hand from their right, and that they have no clue probably about God and what they need to do. And so the big message to him really is, I think it has to do somewhat with perhaps Judah, particularly maybe the northern kingdom's attitude of hatred toward the Assyrians, when in fact their purpose, going all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, is somehow to be a blessing even to their enemies, in a way that their enemies and those that don't know anything about the God of Israel might come to faith. I was thinking, and I'll kind of wrap this up here, but my friend Dennis Carter was asking a little bit last week when I saw him after he'd watched the video about application. How does Obadiah apply to us today? I don't know. Obadiah, it doesn't seem to me to have a lot of application, but it's considered to be inspired and it's part of the Bible. So, we say that all of the Bible has equal weight, so you'll have to maybe figure out Obadiah. Jonah, I think, has to do, I think application can have a lot to do with the way that particularly, I think, Christians view those that don't share their same opinions. And I think we've just come through an election, and I have to say that from what I've seen, both before and maybe after, we're a country divided. And half of the country literally hates, I think, in some ways, the other half of the country. And frankly, I think, and I am part of this group, conservative Christians have that attitude toward liberals. Now, many liberals might not have any faith and look at conservative Christians as a bunch of nutcases, perhaps, and maybe the text doesn't apply to them. But I think maybe the message is when we look at those that have a different perspective than we have, is our response to that one of hatred or dislike, or is our response to that in a sense if they're our enemy, that we're called to love our enemy? And so, the message to, the contemporary Christian might be, what's more important to you, politics or Jesus? And in that sense, I think there's quite a significant application to the book of Jonah. So John finishes his video. John and Joy, they head out of Oklahoma City, head on down the road to their next stop, which we'll tackle in 2 weeks, which is Bethany, Oklahoma, and we'll be looking at the minor prophet Micah. So thanks for joining us today, and hopefully you will go and watch the longer video. And if you have a chance to get hold of a copy of the book, remember chapter 32, that discussion on faith and doubt. So see you in 2 weeks.